Hey everyone, RogueGold here, and today I've got what should be a pretty fun video idea, and that is I thought it might be interesting to rank all of the game modes that we've gotten over the years across the Division 1 and 2. Intentionally or not, the franchise has kind of become synonymous with hosting these unique, standalone modes. Whether it was the 3 we got during the original Division's first year of content, or the 2 that we've gotten in the past 12 months for the Division 2, there's a lot of them and much variety between them. And given we just had the most recent one, Descent, release, and we know we're not going to be getting another one for at least a good long while, I figured it would be a lot of fun to go and rank the ones that we have. Fair warning, this is going to be my own subjective ranking. I am ranking these in terms of my own enjoyment of each of these modes, and there are sure to be differences compared to what each of your own lists would be. So instead of saying, oh my god, you're so wrong about this and that, leave your own list down below. If you want, with explanations of why you rank them how you did, I would absolutely love to read through each and every one. The only thing I wanted to clear up here is that there may be some disagreements between people about what is considered a game mode. For instance, I don't count things like the Dark Zone, Conflict, Incursions, or Raids as game modes. Maybe you could, but to me, a game mode is more of an instance, standalone experience. But again, that's my own arbitrary criteria, so include whatever you please in your own lists down below. Hope you enjoyed the video. If so, consider clicking that subscribe button for more fun Division content like this, and let's get into it. Coming in at last place for me, number 8, we have Kenley College. Now, honestly, I've debated over the years whether or not this is even technically a game mode. It's just very different from all the rest that we have in the game. But as I mentioned before, it is an instance standalone experience from the main game, so I have to honor that. Kenley College was released with the Division 2's Episode 1 update back in the summer of 2019, and it just never really caught on with that many people, whether it was the lack of replayability, with how the individual puzzles and challenges never change in between runs, or the fact that the experience is only available once every 3 weeks, and in between you can't even travel over to its map. It's just always been a black sheep for the franchise. In fairness, I think this concept had potential. It was first pitched as a puzzle-filled mode where you'd unlock different wings of this college over the course of a few weeks, and in theory, that sounds like it could be cool, but in order for it to have any kind of long-term incentive, those puzzles need to evolve, or you need to make it so where you can progress through the college in different routes every time. Anyways, there's lots they could have done to make Kenley more enticing than it is, but because of all of its shortcomings, it comes in last place for me personally. Coming in at number 7, we have Summit. Summit was a mode released for the Division 2 in Title Update 11 back in September of 2020, and Summit is a very interesting one because the premise, in my view, is great. There are just a few too many concepts not explored enough or not accentuated enough, and that has just made it less appealing to me in the long term. The experience is heavily customizable, and I think it wins a lot of points for that, right? A super casual solo player can set the difficulty to hard and just chug away at it, or your top 100 clan team can set it to legendary with 9 directives on and go to town. Of course, this mode also first introduced the targeted loot selector, which really revolutionized farming in the game, so that was awesome. But when you start to mix in some of those less good aspects, the lack of environmental variety is a really big pain point for me personally. The idea of climbing a 100-story skyscraper invites concepts like big open floor plans, multi-leveled rooms with vegetation, water features, balconies, maybe you could run into some cafeterias or conference rooms, and most importantly, windows. It's just the fact that Summit's rooms are very samey, mostly draw from a brown-gray color palette, and there isn't a singular window in the whole darn thing. It's a big drawback, at least for me. Add in things like the fact that the objective variety just doesn't quite feel diverse enough, and the list of things that Summit doesn't excel at start to add up more than the things that it does. So it's at number 7 for me personally, partly due to its own shortcomings and partly due to the strong competitors on this list. At number 6, I've got Resistance, the final game mode that was added to the Division 1 with the 1.8 update all the way back in December of 2017. Now, I think this might be a lower placement than some would give. I know some really adored this mode. I certainly never hated it or anything like that. It just never caught on for me in the way that I think some of the first game's other experiences did. It's the only time the franchise has ever really attempted a true horde mode-like experience. There are some big pluses that come with that. The difficulty gets to an insane level. You get entire waves of hunters. Those were always challenging and awesome. They had some really neat mechanics like spending in-mode currency on exotic boxes you could find in the map. That was always neat. And the concept of unlocking and exploring different areas of the map was super cool. But like I said, it just never fully caught on for me. Too much of the mode felt optional. I never felt compelled to spend my money to unlock different rooms or to upgrade each fortification several times over. It always seemed to me like I was just as successful if I got to the third or fourth room, upgraded one turret, and just held out. And that was a bummer, because the appeal to really encourage movement around the map was always there. It was just never quite capitalized on. That said, Resistance does far more right than it does wrong. The fact that it has 3 unique maps was a big selling point, love that. But like I mentioned, it just never quite gripped me as much as the Division 1's other modes or the rest of the modes higher up on this list. At number 5, I'm putting Descent, the latest game mode to be added to the Pantheon in the Division franchise, released with the Division 2's Year 5 Season 1 update in June of 2023. Descent has been talked a lot about in the recent weeks, but at the end of the day, while I like a lot of what Descent offers, the few drawbacks that it has are quite hard to ignore, and ultimately I think that holds it back from reaching the upper tiers of this list. But as for what I like about the mode, I've said all of this before, but I think out of all the Division's game modes over the years, aside from Survival, Descent has the strongest thematics of any other experience. I mean, you think Descent and you automatically, at least I do, think of that deep green simulation vibe. I think the cohesion of the augmented reality experience that Descent offers is really well done and really cool, and ultimately it's just a very fundamentally different experience than anything the Division has ever seen before, and to me, that gives it big points. I've talked at length about what I think its flaws are, whether it's the lack of a save and return feature. I think that hurts the competitive aspect of this mode irreparably. I think at least one additional tile set for the mode to draw upon would really help, rounding out to 3 map sets in total, and it has some balancing quirks between its talent selections and enemies that you face that could be better, although it is still a very fresh experience, so I don't want to knock it too much on that, as changes will likely come in the future. But as a whole, even though it's very much not for some people, and that's completely fine, I find the gameplay loop of Descent to be very refreshing compared to the rest of the game, and there is really nothing like making a build out of the talent pool from the whole game. Those combinations get wacky, crazy, but most importantly, fun. So for all of those reasons, Descent slips in at my number 5 slot. And that means that coming in at number 4, we have the first game mode ever brought to the Division franchise, Underground, which released all the way back in summer of 2016. Underground is classic. What more is there to say? I have a feeling that some will shame me for this, as I know at least for some, this has always been their number 1. I never caught on to Underground quite as much as some did, but I still really do love and appreciate it. The environments were really cool, my favorite being the raves you could find, as well as the almost puzzle-like sewer connectors. The way it would randomly connect the different rooms and hallways together to create a unique layout each time was great, and absolutely the mode rose in popularity for me once it got its rework in 1.8, most notably when they added in the random hunter spawns. For me, I think it was just always a bunch of smaller gripes that held Underground back from being a top pick, just to name a few. I think its replayability suffered a bit, and the devs just didn't quite have enough experience at the time to make it what it truly could have been. I mean, imagine Summit levels of customization in an Underground-like setup. Oh my god. And while I do appreciate a lot of the environments, I always found myself wishing there was just that one extra push to make it truly stand out for those more mundane runs through service tunnels and subway stations. And there was just a certain amount of predictability that hurt the otherwise randomness of the experience. Be it the loot closets that were always in the same spot, chest puzzles were static and easy after the first run. Underground was and is great, don't get me wrong, but it just never quite reached that level of greatness that some of these others did. So it is a solid number 4 on my list. At number 3, drum roll, I have Countdown. Released in the Division 2's TU15 update back in May of 2022, for me, Countdown is the textbook definition of what a Division game mode is or should be. A session-based, round-based type of experience that you queue into, get great rewards, and get out. That's what Countdown is. It is 15 minutes of action, adrenaline, and more loot than you know what to do with, and for me, being completely honest, one of my absolute favorite combat encounters within the entire Division franchise is the extraction portion of the Countdown mode. Having 8 players rush this exfil zone that is swarming with Black Tusken hunters is exhilarating and blood-pumping every single time, and with the added stakes of the mode being permadeath from that point on, there's never a safe run. You're always on edge, and I can never get enough of that. That's not to say Countdown is perfect. I think objective variety is a very fair criticism, but because of the pace at which you're smashing through these objectives, it just never really quite dragged on me too much. The biggest shame for me is that Countdown has never been expanded upon. I think its general structure and premise is ripe to be replicated on additional maps. I really hope we still see that in the future, because while I love the Fairview map, I think that is one drawback, is the stagnation in the environment. Imagine if they reworked Kenley College to be a second Countdown map and added a third one down the line. As I said, the premise and framework of Countdown itself is what I'm so addicted to, still over a year after its release. And so for that reason, it clears any other Division 2 game mode for me personally and ranks among the franchise's best. At number 2, this is going to be one of the most controversial things I've ever said on my channel, I have Survival. Survival was released with the Division 1's 1.5 update back in November of 2016. Now, obviously, Survival was going to be up here on the list. It's one of the most iconic and recognizable modes that the franchise has ever produced, but it's always had its flaws, at least in my eyes, and we'll get to that. But there are too many good things I could say about it. The reinvention of progression, having your character start from scratch on each run was fresh and exciting. You have to remember that this released before Battle Royales were ever really a thing or all that popular. So it felt like a fresh concept. The environment is unbeatable. I contest that you have not experienced the Division until you played Survival. The more skill-based PvP always felt good and thrilling. Survival first gave us the Hunters, and I will forever say that they were at their best in this mode, primarily due to our lack of builds and power. Survival just was and will always be iconic and revolutionary. That said, it's not perfect. Some contest that this is not an issue for them, but for me, one of its biggest killers in replayability in the mode was the lack of dynamic loot, environment, and enemy spawns. Every round featured the exact same chests, fire barrels, enemy patrols, etc. locations, right? Everything was always exactly the same. And in a mode that is all about the unpredictable with the weather and the other players, it became less about your perseverance and more about your luck in spawn location and how close you were to an efficient loot route and how well you knew said loot route. Because if someone else beat you to it, that is automatically a huge disadvantage. So I always thought that that was one huge stain on this mode, and it really did, I think, hold it back from its full potential. But even with that in mind, Survival was just so innovative and awesome, so much so that it is getting its own spin-off with Heartland. As Redstorm has said, the game is basically Survival's spiritual successor. So Survival's legacy and impact on this franchise cannot be understated, and while I do not believe it is perfect, it is hard to argue against its greatness. That leaves just one mode to go, and at number 1, to some shock, I'm sure, my all-time favorite game mode from the Division franchise is Last Stand. Now, don't get it twisted. This placement for Last Stand comes purely for my love of player versus player content in general in gaming, and also because of my specific love for Division PvP. Last Stand is not perfect in any way. In fact, it had quite a few shortcomings and areas in need of improvement, but the Division 1's PvP holds my favorite gaming experiences and memories to this day, and Last Stand offered that turn to 11 in epic 8v8 combat scenarios. The mode released with the Division 1's 1.6 update in February of 2017 and offered these matchmakeable sessions with high PvP intensity as well as PvE objectives if you didn't want to partake in that. I think the mode's biggest flaw was its lack of dedicated maps. It used entirely existing portions of the Dark Zone map to create its 4 play spaces, which certainly made for some cool arenas and fight locations, but you could always feel where there were some things that just weren't quite tuned right, because they just weren't made for this mode, whether that be the spawn locations, objective placements, etc. But even with that in mind, and the frequent spawn camps that would occur, Last Stand has simply offered me more fun and awesome moments in gameplay than any other mode that the franchise has ever produced. It's that simple. Having 8 versus 8 players duking it out for control on one street is like no other experience. With striker builds rushing to the front lines, Deadeye players popping shots from the back, skill builds slinging out seeker mines and sticky bombs, and reclaimers scrambling to keep everybody alive, Last Stand is just pure bottled chaos in a way that I think I will never forget and will always appreciate and love. So for me, there is no other choice. It stands tall and proud at the number 1 spot on my list. And so, that, my friends, is going to do it for my ranking of the Division's all-time greatest game modes, a category of content that has become synonymous and famous within the Division, and one that houses a variety of different experiences and type of enjoyment to be had. Game modes will forever be core to the Division, so this was a lot of fun to look back on the 8 that it has received over the years. I very much hope you all enjoyed the video. Please do let me know your own thoughts on my ranking below, but also leave yours. I would absolutely love to see everybody's list 1 through 8. Whether or not you leave explanations is up to you, but I'm highly curious to see other people's picks. Just keep in mind, whether you're reacting to my list, somebody else's, or writing your own, this stuff is all subjective. You might highly disagree with the ranking that somebody else made, but that doesn't mean that your own picks are wrong or vice versa. It's all about personal content preferences and enjoyment, and more than anything, it's so cool that we get to have this diverse grouping of modes to reflect on and still go back and play. That is going to do it for me today, though, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. RogueGold. Out.